frozen silence. It began on a frozen February night in 1959. 9 hikers, young, brilliant, and full of life, set out into the icy wilderness of the Ural Mountains. They were students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, led by a man named Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering prodigy known for his discipline and calm under pressure. They were no amateurs. Each was an experienced mountaineer, certified to handle the brutal Siberian cold. But none of them ever came back. Days later, when rescue teams arrived, they didn't find what they expected. The hikers' tent stood torn open from the inside. Their belongings, boots, jackets, maps, were still neatly placed, as if they had left in a hurry. Bare footprints trailed away into the snow, leading nowhere. What happened that night has haunted Russia and the world for over 60 years. An expedition of 9, reduced to silence by something unseen, something that still refuses to be explained. The journey began on January 25th, 1959. 10 students, including one who would later turn back due to illness, boarded a train to the far reaches of the Ural Mountains. Their goal, to reach Otorten, a remote peak, whose name in the Mansi language meant, "Don't go there." It was meant to be a challenge, a test of endurance, worthy of the Soviet era's spirit of conquest. But as they traveled deeper into the wilderness, the tone of their diaries shifted from excitement to exhaustion to unease. One of them wrote, "The wind howls like a cry. The trees creak as if alive. The place feels strange, empty." On February 1st, they set up camp on the slopes of Twilighthistora, a name that means Mountain of the Dead. Locals avoided it. Legends spoke of shadowed figures that walked its ridges at night, of voices carried by the wind. But these were rational students, scientists, not believers in superstition. They laughed off the stories, pitched their tent, and settled in. That night, snow began to fall. The temperature dropped below -25 degrees Celsius, and somewhere between midnight and dawn, something went terribly wrong. When rescuers finally reached the camp weeks later, the scene looked like a battlefield. The tent had been slashed open from within, as if the hikers had clawed their way out. Their footprints, bare or in socks, led downhill toward a dark forest. There, under a tall cedar tree, 2 bodies were found lying side by side, shoeless, half naked, as if they had fled in panic. Nearby, remnants of a small fire. Their hands were burned, their faces frozen in terror. 3 more bodies were found between the forest and the tent, fallen as though they were trying to crawl back uphill. Their positions suggested they had been blinded by snow or fear. But the most horrifying discoveries came 2 months later, when the remaining 4 were uncovered, buried under deep snow in a ravine. One had a fractured skull, 2 others had broken ribs, as though crushed by an immense force, and one, Lyudmila Dubinina, was missing her tongue. No sign of struggle, no footprints of outsiders, no blood, just death, cold, quiet, and inexplicable. The official Soviet report called it an unknown compelling force, a phrase that only deepened the mystery. What could drive 9 intelligent, trained mountaineers to rip open their own tent and flee barefoot into sub-zero blizzards? Fear, madness, or something else entirely? Many theories emerged. Avalanche, infrasound, military testing. But the deeper you look, the stranger it becomes, because the injuries didn't match any avalanche pattern. The tent wasn't buried. The tracks were too orderly. No sign of panic, just silent departure. And radiation was found on their clothes. Yes, radiation. Even more chilling, the local Mansi people reported seeing orange orbs glowing in the night sky around that time, hovering, moving in silence above the mountain. Soviet records later confirmed sightings of unidentified lights, yet all official references were quietly buried in classified archives. But perhaps the most disturbing clue lies not in the evidence, but in the silence that followed. The Soviet investigation was abruptly closed. The case file was sealed for decades. Families were told nothing. Witnesses vanished. And Twilighthistora, the Mountain of the Dead, was marked off limits for years. Even today, hikers say they hear strange noises there, whispers carried by the wind, footsteps in the snow where no one walks, as if the mountain remembers what happened and doesn't forgive. The Dyatlov Pass Mystery isn't just a story of death. It's a story of fear, cover-ups, and the unknown lurking within human logic. Because sometimes what we call mystery is simply history refusing to explain itself. When the rescuers first reported what they saw at Dyatlov Pass, the Soviet authorities didn't believe them. Torn tents, missing shoes, bodies half naked in sub-zero cold. It sounded like madness or something unspeakable, so the state sent investigators. But instead of answers, they returned with fear. Autopsies revealed details no one could explain. The first 5 bodies had died of hypothermia, their skin pale blue, their hands frozen mid-motion. But the other 4 told a different story. Crushed ribs, fractured skulls, and internal bleeding. Injuries so severe that doctors compared them to the aftermath of a car crash. Yet there were no signs of struggle, no external wounds, no bruising, typical of violence. Even stranger, radiation was detected on some of their clothes, traces high enough to alarm military investigators. Where could students from a civilian institute have come into contact with radioactive material? No one had an answer, and soon no one was allowed to ask. Witnesses in nearby villages reported strange lights in the sky on the night of the tragedy. Orange, pulsing orbs drifting above the mountain peaks, silent, methodical, almost watching. The same lights had been seen by soldiers at a distant airbase, but when the report reached Moscow, those records vanished overnight. The official story became simple: death by an unknown natural force. It was a phrase so vague it could mean anything or nothing. The files were sealed, stamped, classified, and hidden away. Even the families of the victims were warned not to question the government's version. At the funerals, soldiers stood nearby, ensuring silence. Yet rumors persisted. People whispered that the students had stumbled into a secret military experiment, perhaps a test of new weapons or high-altitude parachute flying. Others claimed the glowing lights were evidence of something extraterrestrial. And then there were those who believed the mountain itself had taken them. The Mansi tribes had warned the hikers not to camp there. Kholat Shakal, Mountain of the Dead, was, according to their legends, a cursed land. Centuries ago, 9 Mansi hunters were said to have vanished there under mysterious circumstances. 9 hunters, 9 students. The symmetry chilled investigators who dared to look deeper. Some locals said the mountain had its own voice, a low, vibrating hum that made travelers dizzy or disoriented. Modern scientists would later call this infrasound, a subsonic frequency capable of inducing panic, hallucinations, even madness. Could the hikers have fled their tent in terror, driven by invisible sound waves and the howling wind? Maybe, but that still didn't explain the radiation, or the crushed bones, or the missing tongue. The case dragged on for months, each report more contradictory than the last. Photographs recovered from the hikers' cameras showed smiling faces, laughter, snow, routine. But the final frame captured something else. A blurry figure, humanoid yet distorted, standing in the distance between the trees. Some said it was one of the group members caught by accident. Others swore it looked wrong, too tall, too dark, too still. Then, just as abruptly as it began, the investigation was shut down in May 1959. The files were locked away, the site renamed Dyatlov Pass in memory of the group's leader, and the case faded into whispers of conspiracy and horror. Years passed, and the snow covered everything. The tent, the blood, the footprints, but not the questions. In 1990, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the case was reopened by journalists. New witnesses emerged. One said his military unit had been ordered to retrieve strange metallic debris near the site. Another, a retired official, admitted off record that we found something we were not supposed to find. The government's silence only deepened suspicion. Some researchers pointed to parachute mines, Soviet weapons that exploded mid-air, producing concussive shockwaves without visible burns. That could explain the trauma and the fear, but again, it didn't explain the torn tent from the inside. It didn't explain why they walked calmly into their own deaths. It didn't explain the eyes that witnesses claimed glowed faintly when the bodies were retrieved. Eyes clouded not just by ice, but by something else. Even decades later, the Dyatlov Pass remains a place where compasses spin erratically and electronics malfunction. Hikers who visit speak of sudden dread, of shadows flickering in the white vastness when no one is there. And each February, the wind howls through the valley, carrying a sound that resembles human screams. Locals say it's just the storm, but others believe it's the voices of the 9 who never made it home. More than 60 years later, the mystery still breathes beneath the snow. In 2019, Russian investigators reopened the case once again, armed with drones, satellite scans, and modern forensics. Their conclusion? An avalanche. But no one truly believed it. The slope was too gentle. The tent was never buried. And the evidence, the footprints, the injuries, the radiation, still defied logic. Survivors' families called it a cover-up. Some believed the hikers saw something they weren't meant to, perhaps a secret missile test, or a weapon that fell from the sky. Others turned to the supernatural. The Mansi still speak of men of snow, spirits that guard the mountain and punish intruders who disturb their land. 9 hikers, 9 souls taken, just as in the ancient tale. In the decades since, explorers and filmmakers have returned to Dyatlov Pass. Many report hearing faint voices on the wind or seeing lights dancing above the ridge, exactly as witnesses described in 1959. Even technology fails there. Batteries drain, compasses twist, and radio signals vanish. It's as if the mountain itself rejects human presence. What happened that night remains frozen in silence, caught between science and nightmare. 9 young lives ended not by cold or fear alone, but by something that watches, even now, through the drifting snow of Kholat Shachul. The mountain of the dead keeps its secrets, and some mysteries are not meant to be solved. Which haunting event should I uncover next?